The Discourse starts right now with Cheryl Oates and Erika Barootes.
Welcome back to The Discourse and our 2025 budget special. The UCP has introduced their 2025-26 budget, not a conservative budget. Erika, tell us your thoughts.
Well, I will say I was pissed yesterday. For those that haven't looked, it's a $5.2 billion deficit. I don't like deficits. I want to balance the budget. I did go to a breakfast this morning where Minister Horner was talking about the budget. There was more reassurance than I think the message yesterday about how they're going to manage it over the next 3 years as they are required to pay it back under the fiscal framework that was introduced by this government. But yeah, I don't know. Like there's just so much that I think could have been done differently. There are pieces that I like, I will say. Like I am fucking thrilled that I finally get my tax cut that was promised. And last year when we did our budget special, I couldn't go and be like, yay, the campaign promise is here. So I do really appreciate, and I get that they're going to say that that also impacts why there's a deficit, but like I'm happy that money is going back into the pockets of Albertans, especially during this time.
You can't have it both ways. You can't say, I don't want to run a deficit, but also I want all the shiny objects.
Well, no, I wanted that promise. I wanted it last year. And so like I say, like yesterday I was pissed off. He did reassure me at this breakfast this morning about like, basically, this is it's a shitty deck of cards, right? And I'll admit you guys were dealt a shitty deck of cards too.
Now you admit we had a shitty deck of cards.
So was Alison Redford. I was there and it was a shitty deck of cards. But like, you know, I do get the pressures that they are facing. And I think we all do. Population, inflation, tariffs, like this is all like a lot of it is out of their control. But I still think you could balance a budget. And I know that they'll tell me different. Don't fucking care. I want to see a balanced budget.
I think this is ridiculous. And we can talk about the budget, you know, on its face as well. But for all 4 years of the NDP in power, we did our absolute best with much, much lower oil prices than currently. Like we're talking $40 lower than oil is today, almost $50 lower. And we still managed to protect public health care. We still managed to protect education. And yes, we had to run a debt or a deficit and also had to go into debt to do it. And you guys just like were relentless and now introducing a budget which does, you know, runs a huge deficit and racks up $15 billion of debt in the course of the term.
Yeah, it's really hard for me to swallow. Like I was not saying I am going to support this budget because I find it really hard to be critical of essentially like how the NDP spend and have this budget. So it's really tough for me to say, like, I love this. I get that they're in a really shitty spot and I get that tariffs are coming in. It's going to be an unprecedented like time of how do we navigate? Because we don't know. Is it 12%? Is it 25%? Is it nothing? Like, no, you know, they can't predict. So I do like that they do have a $4 billion contingency in there, because I think last year we both criticized that the contingency budget was too low. And then we had Jasper wildfires and it was used up real quick. So they do put some safeguards in, but at the same time, I just like pains me to see that there wasn't a lot of ministries making really tough cuts that it appears.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I know the budget just came out yesterday and I'm sure you haven't gone through it line by line, but like, what would you do? Like, are you talking about cutting, like in this budget, just for a second, in this budget, like the government says they continue to invest in public sector services. Truthfully, like when you look at the budget lines for healthcare and education, they're either a cut or they're not keeping up with population and inflation. So are you saying those are places you would have liked to see cut more?
Well, I think that there is probably, and I'm not an expert into the health line by line, I think that there is always efficiencies to be found. Like we have criticized for a decade that we pay the highest per capita and we have the worst returns. So do I think that there is efficiencies to find? Absolutely. Do I think that the government made, you know, investment in physicians, in surgical capacity, in a bunch of things. And I think this was actually a win. Like the one ministry that I'm like, okay, I'll take it, was actually, I did think that the education budget was allocated in the right place, meaning getting butts in seats by building, and then also some of those supports. However, I think that the capital spending in this budget was a miss. And what I mean by that, like, I think that there was a lot of very pretty projects that from a capital grant perspective, I think could have been like, we can't do it this year. Right. And there's a lot of those, whether probably across all ministries. But, some of the arts and culture stuff, like I get that we want to support that, but when you got to tighten your belt, that's where I would look. I also hate that mental health and addictions is a $1.7 billion budget line. For what? I get that we're building, but that's also then structural costs. That's not even taking into account the operational costs for these recovery centers that we don't have a proof of concept on, and we're already committed to 11.
So wait, are you saying they should have spent more there?
No,
less?
I think they less.
Oh.
I think it should. Sorry, yes. So there's mental health and addictions has $1.7 billion. I think that is way too much. I don't like that it's its own ministry as is, but it's what are they, what is the proof of concept that is having this? Where are those mental health pieces that should be in across the government? It is a recovery only model, and we're paying a lot for this Center of Excellence and Recovery Alberta. And I think give them $700 million and there's $1 billion back in your budget.
Nothing like arbitrarily coming up with a number to support people dealing with mental health crisis.
I think that we still need it. But again, is these models that they've built, I support building 3 of them. We have 11 committed in this infrastructure plan. And so build 3, make sure they work. It's never been done before. So it would be totally fair to not do it as just popping them up everywhere. Let's slow down and make sure that if this is the model that we want to do, that it actually has proof of concept, and scale it back, slow it down. So spread that money over 5 years.
Or maybe, I'm not saying there should have been less money put into mental health. It's really hard to tell from a line, what that actually means and whether you could cut it or whether it should be increased. But I looked at this and yes, the province is investing tens of millions of dollars into surgical capacity. We need more surgeries in Alberta. I think, it's up for debate whether it should actually be funneled into private surgical delivery because, there's a lot of questions being raised around that right now. But where I'm concerned is looking at the health line items, cuts to primary care, cuts to Indigenous healthcare, cuts to research, all of these places where we know that our healthcare system is not doing great right now. And adding just surgical capacity does not make people have better access to ERs. It doesn't get us alternate level of care beds to get people moving out of ERs. It doesn't fix the crisis that currently exists in hospitals. So seeing cuts in those lines to me, although we have surgical capacity, is really, really concerning. And I think it's hard for the government to say, don't worry, we've protected healthcare at this critical time while we run a deficit, because based on this, they haven't.
Yeah, but okay, so I haven't gone through detail by detail on the primary care. What I do know from primary care is there is $7 billion allocated to physician as well, as physician compensation. And so I don't think that is totally all primary care. I think there's other parts of primary care. It's a network, and it's a wraparound service. And then there's $15 million for recruitment and retention. So I don't know what you mean when you say that primary care had specific cuts where that's a lot of money.
The line item year to year is cut. Primary care itself is cut year over year.
But does that have to do with the refocusing?
It could.
I'm just wondering that
it could,
when
but
you
I
put
don't
it in
see.
a pile, yeah.
I don't see it. Then explain it. If you're telling me. If you're telling me now that the reorg is happening, this is going somewhere else because this has moved
it's
here,
apples to
fine.
Oranges now. Yeah.
But for me, as a citizen worried about the capacity of our hospitals to deal with an aging population, this makes me more concerned. And when you have, every hospital across the province is looking for alternate level of care beds so they can move people out of ERs and get them the care that they need and bring people with emergencies into ERs, there's nothing in this budget to do that.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think that is we've talked about narratives a lot. Is maybe that's the story because I'm looking at some numbers. It's $644 million for primary care to and they've kept saying to give someone attachment to a primary care provider. Now that's not just physicians. $20 million to support the work of nurse practitioners. There's an Indigenous $45 million for Indigenous health initiatives over 3 years.
That's down from the year before.
45 million, it's down. Okay. So then, yeah, I mean, that one, like, I don't get that, but like maybe there is a story that they should be telling about this refocusing and the impacts of like, it is apples to oranges when you're looking at numbers. I don't know, right? Like, and I haven't gone through it over and over. I'm just like looking at some figures that I was able to pull. I do think though, like coming back to like, again, that cut, and I want to be serious. Like we know that I am very passionate about mental health. I think that like one of my criticisms of mental health and addictions is that the mental health piece is very absent. It's all about Recovery Alberta. And that's maybe where I'm like, is it need 1.7 billion and what are we focusing on? I strongly believe that that should be across all ministries and maybe the money's then just reallocated. But it really stood out to me as like a why.
Yeah.
Why? When you look at all these other ministries that are far less, and this does tie into healthcare. So you add it and you're like at what, 28 billion or something for healthcare?
Yeah.
For what?
No, and
What
like,
are we getting for it?
but like, I think for years there has been a criticism in Alberta that we spend too much on healthcare for what the outcomes are. But that doesn't mean you can arbitrarily come in and be like, we're just going to lop this off the top because it's a
I don't think they
system-wide issue.
They keep increasing it. Like there has not been a UCP
Overall,
budget
yeah,
where,
but you can't just dump it all into surgical and say we've increased healthcare because it's an issue across healthcare. The other place that I saw an issue with, like I know they're saying we're investing in education, but if you look at education, this budget was built on the finance minister and the premier saying we're having record population growth. This province is going to grow to 5 million. We're going to have to deal with incoming population. A lot of that is kids, and the education budget doesn't even keep up with population and inflation. So we all know that if it doesn't keep up with I would at least keep up with population and inflation. It's a cut if not. And we can't afford to go backwards right now when we already have classrooms full of kids.
You're right, like we do have, and that was one thing that really was stressed listening to the minister yesterday in his tabling of the budget, as well as like this growth, right? Like the Alberta is Calling campaign is like now going to be a disaster because it worked too well. And we have 500,000 new people in the last 3 years, 250, I think, alone in the last 18 months. And it's like, yeah, I get that. But I also, and so, yes, we need to provide services for those folks. I don't think this was an easy thing of like, how do you provide services or how do you grow budgets while still being conservative? Like, I think this is almost near impossible with, again, the additions of like tariffs and things like that. I just wish it doesn't feel to me like every minister is coming out today with a tail between their legs, like they had to make some really tough cuts. And I think that's what I would have liked to see a little bit more, that there was like a little bit more, well, we did this, but yeah, it's a really tough fucking year. And this is really hard. And a lot of them, like there's a lot of like real flashy stuff, especially on like capital investments. And I'm not talking about roads and hospitals and schools. Like that to me is necessary. But there's some that I'm just like, I think the challenge or where I'd want to see some reduction is, what is it, 3.8 billion in capital. I'd like to see that lower.
Interesting that Conservatives now feel that budgeting is difficult. Let's go to your tax cut. So a couple people messaged me yesterday and said, like, is this just like a shiny object to distract from the current controversy around procurement? And I was like, if it was, like, it's pretty much a one-day story, like not a great distraction.
It's not even really making the like headlines like it should, right?
Yeah, and I think like, so you tell me, but this is from the outside watching, as someone who worked on communication strategy for a number of budgets, I was like, you always have to have like something, especially in a tough year, especially when you're racking up debt and deficit and it's a tough budget and there's a lot of uncertainty. You've got to have like a little treat in there for the population, something that's going to end up in the headlines. And this has, like, it had some headlines prior to the budget as well. So that's what I saw it as. And also, I think that the government might be worried that in out years, this may be even tougher to implement depending on the impact of the tariffs. So, like, it's now or never.
Yeah, I think it was interesting yesterday, and I didn't get this until the budget address, was that they are delivering on the full implementation 2 years ahead of schedule, which...
Well, 2 years ahead of the delayed schedule.
Yes, no. But what I'm saying is that like that was all, like, I think the shinier nugget. I don't think that they could have got by not implementing this tax cut. It was the number one first campaign commitment. It's very conservative in putting money back in Albertans' pockets in hopes that they reinvest it in the economy, right? Like there is a benefit on a revenue generating side of things by giving it to the power to the people to use. So I like it. I think that they would be crucified probably if they did introduce it. Do I think that they needed to I don't think from a comms perspective, it's getting the right. It's not giving them an out, I guess.
It's hard to give credit when you're like, it's coming in early, but the date for it to come in was also late. Like it was supposed to come in immediately following the election.
I thought that was a weird thing to say in the budget address. Like I was like, that's kind of a weird technicality. Like we're delivering on our commitment, delayed but early. Like when was it really supposed to be? So I don't know.
And then
I like that it's there.
And the other thing, if you look closely at this budget, for those who are looking forward to the tax cut, it's about $750 a person if you're making over $60,000. So $2 a day, not nothing, especially in this climate. But in this budget, educational property tax is going up by 14%. And there's also 38 new fees. So for those really pumped about $2 a day, like that's probably already eaten up by your educational property tax increase if you're paying that. And then 38 new fees brought in by this government, which there's a lot, like if you look at the budget, it's about $70 million in revenue. So it probably evens out. Like I think at the end of the day, Albertans are probably not better off in terms of money in their pocket.
To 2/3 essentially. Like if you're paying that 14.1, which was highlighted to me this morning, and then the tax cut. However, I think the argument that would be made is that the property tax is an education property tax and therefore goes back into the education system. It's still revenue though.
And that's great. But for those for the government telling people we're going to keep money in your pocket, like probably not. Like for most people, this isn't really going to end up with more money in your pocket. It's all going to even out.
Yeah, I think when you look at it, it's like $1,500 per family. And that may be the difference of your kid doing a sporting event or an extracurricular activity.
If you got $1,500, sure. But we're talking about 38 new fees and 14% increase in education tax, which is probably not $1,500 in your pocket.
And fair, right? Like I think that, but to someone, when you're looking, we were both in comms politically, like I think that is a story that can resonate with the general public, that this is back into your pocket. Now, some people don't have to pay that property tax fee perhaps, or other things that they might end up getting the full $1,500. But again, it's not as good of as a news story piece than I think it deserves, in the sense that like just in the current climate, you're not getting the bang for the buck that you think you are.
And it's interesting, and maybe this sort of segues into talking about like the threat of tariffs coming in and the economic threats currently hanging over us from the United States, because BC introduces their budget next week, and they have actually decided not to give residents the $1,000 rebate that they had promised during the election, saying in these fiscal times, we just can't afford to do it. But here in Alberta, they're saying the opposite. They're saying in these fiscal times, this is what people need. So it's an interesting difference in the approach from both provinces trying to manage their
debt. Do you think that's ideological, or do you just think it's like what the expectations of the voter are, right? Like Danielle Smith didn't introduce it right after she was elected as a campaign promise. Like, do they think they may get a year grace like she did?
I think that everybody's doing what they think they have to do, and they're using the tariffs as political cover to do it. So Danielle Smith feels like she's got to bring this tax cut in. It's been delayed. She might not be able to bring it in an out year, so she's just going to do it now and say everybody needs more money in their pocket right now. And BC is saying like our balance sheet sucks, and we just fiscally responsibly cannot bring this in, and we're going to use the tariffs as cover not to bring it in. So I think honestly they're doing the same thing.
Yeah, well, and I think to either side of things in different ideological like governments, it's so unpredictable, right? Like you're dealing with Donald Trump, who is unpredictable. The numbers are unpredictable. The direct impact on, agriculture, food production, when we had Bianca Parsons from AFPA on it, was like, I didn't really realize the trickle-down effect that it was going to have on everything. And like the big concern right now is especially our agriculture industry and the food that goes on our plates and in our grocery stores. So I think it's interesting that people are doing different things, and I don't know if it's ideologically based or not, but I do think that, the tariffs are what were a huge thing that was talked about yesterday and in the media about this because of the unpredictability, which is why like putting $4 billion in the contingency budget, which is double from last year, I think is a good fiscal accountability measure.
Interesting, though, because listening to Minister Horner talk about that contingency fund, I think there were some people who thought like, some of this will be reserved if Alberta needs to deal with incoming tariffs or impact on business on a program basis. But the minister made really clear yesterday, like this is to deal with current programs and the impacts that the tariffs have on current programs. So there's not money set aside here to subsidize businesses or support individuals should they be impacted by the tariffs. The Alberta government expects the federal government to do that, which is really different than what Doug Ford just promised in his election success in Ontario, where he said, we will support businesses. If you're impacted by tariffs, we will bring in supports for you to make sure that you're operational and continue through this period. Alberta's basically saying we don't have any money for that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know how that will go over with voters, honestly. And like the small business, especially ideologically, we are very free enterprise, support business, but also let business thrive. One of the other things that is going to be interesting to watch is the labor piece. Like this is 6.8, 6.2, 6.8, somewhere in the sixes, below $7 billion of labor, and negotiations are coming forward. So like there's a lot of unknown there too that I think and I hope that that's built into maybe the contingency or some of the Treasury Board Finance specific budget lines to address that potential growth, right? Like we have a huge population growth, but we've also got labor negotiations and collective bargaining coming down the chute. And, it'll definitely, I think, increase maybe what the current numbers are.
Yeah, and actually the budget, there is a compensation line that does increase and makes exactly the point that you just made, saying like, just to keep up with current population growth, compensation of public sector has to grow. And then the minister did say that part of the contingency fund is set aside because they do have bargaining coming up. So I think that's a responsible thing to do. Like they're getting the best advice they can and they're saying put money aside for how this ends.
Yeah. So let me ask, because like I know what I don't like, and it's just having a deficit, right? What did you not like and what did you like? Like, I mean, you just highlighted some of the contingencies, some of the the guardrails around compensation, things like that. Like what, and maybe what would you have done differently if you could have picked? Because I kind of went after capital grants.
So here's what I liked. I liked the humility. Like budgets are hard. Budgets are really hard, especially when things are out of your control and not necessarily going the way that you had intended. Budgeting was really, really hard when the NDP was in power. We had a catastrophic drop in oil prices. Just for those who don't remember, Western Canadian Select was like $6 a barrel in 2018, and WTI dropped to 26. Like now we're sitting at $70 a barrel, about $70 a barrel for this entire term. And it's still difficult because there's a lot of pressures and a lot of uncertainty facing the government, and they've promised a lot of big things. And I just appreciate the humility that this is not easy. It's not like a conservative can come in and check a box and suddenly budget's balanced and we can wave a magic wand and everything happens. I appreciate that. And I appreciate the honesty Minister Horner has offered around it. I thought he had a very honest press conference following the budget. What I would do differently, like truthfully, I think if you're going to run a deficit, if you're going to offer a tax cut, you first and foremost have to protect healthcare and education. And where we're seeing cuts and where we're seeing spending not keep up with population and inflation, I think that's really irresponsible. At a time when people will absolutely need public services, I think they should keep up with at least population and inflation. Yeah.
So this is the first time that, like, I mean, I've always been a part of a balanced budget. You were a part of running a deficit. Like, we love to be fiscal conservatives, like in our province. We've also like to spend, like, Lougheed was mentioned over and over by Minister Horner in his address, and like kind of the similar times, but we had money then, right? And Ralph Klein, like, it's easy to be a conservative when you have money coming in.
Of course.
Right? But
it's easy to be anybody.
Like, as our province, like, I remember one of the first big ones was under Alison Redford, and it was like the bitumen bubble in 2000 and, what was that, 2012? Anyways, I mean, 2008 wasn't easy either, but I just remember like having a conversation as we're rolling out the budget. It's like sometimes Albertans don't have the appetite to actually truly tighten their belts when need be. And so like you're saying raise the deficit if you're already taking a hit. But do you think that like politically they can do that? Like how does a voter, you got the backlash of deficits. So like how do the Albertan voter, like we try to be conservative, but we don't really want to make the tough change.
I think
changes.
They should have prioritized spending to healthcare and education and AISH payments, which also get cut in this budget. I think they should have prioritized those investments before offering a tax cut. A tax cut, like $750 is, yes, nice, that's great. But we're talking about like, it's over $1 billion in spending when you add it all up. I think that would be better spent right now into protecting public services. But I get like it's a campaign commitment. It's a political thing they have to do. I think the money's better spent protecting public services.
Okay. And I mean, I saw Denchi a little bit. Again, like I didn't watch his coverage. Like, is that what he's saying, to spend more?
I think the NDP did a great job yesterday. And I know I've sort of said like they've been quiet lately or they haven't had a message breakthrough. I think their message was really clear yesterday. They basically said cuts, chaos, and corruption. And like that's alliteration. Keep it going. But really highlighting all the cuts that, for a regular person trying to follow along with the budget, if you look at the budget, it's easy to miss the fact that like essentially these are cuts to frontline services. Chaos as this whole healthcare system continues to be reorganized with little results shown so far and not really an understanding to the public about what it means. And then obviously corruption refers to the current questions being raised around procurement inside the government. So I thought their stuff was very pointed yesterday, and they did some quick research and turned it around fast. And I think it gives people a lot more information to analyze the budget on their own.
Yeah. And I would say like this budget did make the NDP's job a little easier, given the fact that like it isn't super conservative. It's not super tough cuts. Like I said, the one thing that I think I just wish we could figure out as a province or a government or whatever it is explaining, like, I struggle when, to an average Albertan, you see this surplus from last year, right? And I know that money has been allocated, and I know that because we've lived this. But to an average Albertan, the message that has been shared for the last year is like, we had a surplus last year. Of pretty close to what the deficit is now. Then you go in and you have a deficit. And then you also were talking about like, and in 2050, we are going to have all this money. And so for me, where I'm like, okay, if I was looking at like, how do you treat this like a household budget? And to me, like talking about the Heritage Savings Trust Fund or Trust Plan, and like I know that there are some rules around the fiscal framework that require you to pay use surplus to pay down the debt or put it into the savings. And I know that they're saying that the savings over time will be able to produce more money to be able to pay off future debt and deficit. But honestly, like if you look at it from a household budget, it's like, sorry, children, we're starving today so you can go to university in the future. Like that is, I think, just this weird message and that I don't get. And I think an average Albertan is like, well, why can't you just use that money now to balance a budget or address inflation, address population growth? Like,
also,
Sorry,
I was just going to say on the Heritage Savings Trust Fund, I also struggle to see the plan. Like even with the investment this year, which depending on who you ask is between $1 billion and $2 billion, I just don't get like how does it possibly grow to $250 billion by 2050? Like I just don't see the plan there. So yes, I get that they're investing. I get that they've changed the rules around how earnings are used, but I don't see the plan to grow it. And so I think that's a part of it too, is like you can say, yes, we're saving for the future, but I don't see a plan to save for the future.
Well, and again, like it was always known as the rainy day fund under all the other
government.
Every government. And it was like, it was drained. And I do think we should put it back. But it just doesn't sit with me on like why we wouldn't then use the money that we need today to address this huge population growth, like in this province. I love it. I know why I moved here from Saskatchewan, but now everyone else has caught on. And I'm like, I don't want you all here because of like the struggles that it faces. But yeah, I don't know the the projection of how it gets there by 2050. I just think it's like really hard for an average Albertan that looks at this and is like, how does this impact me, and why are my property taxes going up? Do we have a deficit? Like, I don't know. I think that it's challenging and it's a hard thing to probably communicate, but it just feels like it's not hitting the mark with what this means for average Albertans.
Here's my prediction. Post-budget, post-federal election, Danielle Smith wants to talk about equalization.
Well, we always should.
That is always the answer. Don't have enough money? Equalization.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's just so much, like, it's a budget. It's like, but like, what are the key things? You talked about AISH. So I want to highlight too, and I don't know the impacts of this. I do think there was need for AISH reform. I know that the government's put in place where the hours in which an individual can work that is on AISH to be able to offset, they've increased that. So there is more income potential for individuals on AISH. I think, I mean, this might sound and maybe not as compassionate as you, but there's a lot of people that maybe don't qualify for AISH or could, I don't know, they're like, example, and some people can get this, but like the one I would use is type 2 diabetes. If you're on AISH and that you weren't born with, or it wasn't through your genes, but like because you've made life choices that don't make you, they give you type 2 diabetes. I don't think those people should be on AISH. Compassionate. No, but it's like, I don't think you should be on AISH.
Okay. Well, I don't know the details of the changes to the program. All I know is across the board in the budget line, assisted income, is that what it's called? For severely handicapped people is a cut. And so we're talking about people who, for the most part, cannot work, are qualified under severely handicapped, who the government is supporting. This is, has historically been a tougher program to get into. There's a cut there. So the people who most need the support, the people who have the least amount of money, are getting less money.
Well, I think
but don't worry, everyone else gets a tax cut.
But I don't know if it would be like, and I don't know the difference of like what is now their earner potential, given that they're allowed to work more. I do think though, this like who qualifies for AISH should be part of this, because I think that, allocate whatever money you want, but it should go to those that truly cannot help themselves. And so that's something I know this government has tried to do. They tried to do it under Kenny with AISH reforms, and it didn't stick. So I'm not surprised that this one came through, but I think that's probably one of the only ministries that made, from what I see, tough stakeholder decisions.
Feels like maybe it shouldn't have been the first thing to go, but I feel like there could have been a few things ahead of it in the priority line.
What would you do? Like you're saying, increase spending or reallocate it.
Listen,
like,
it's really hard.
What would you think would be what would be a number? Like even Minister Horner explained today, like if we did everything, it would be like $9 billion.
Okay, but this is my thing. You can't just pick a number. Like you can, but like you can't just make arbitrary cuts.
He had figured it out. Like I'm sure there was some math.
No, but you're asking me like, what would your number be? I don't have a number. Like I would say, we did this in government where you ask people, you ask every minister to go away and find efficiencies in their departments. In our government, yes, it was hard to do. Did we hit the targets every single time? No, but ministers were able to go into their ministries and say, is this absolutely essential right now? It is not. We're not going to do it. That sucks. These people are going to be unhappy that they're not going to get their money, but we have to do it. And like you're saying, that's not in this budget. So I think that's a place to start.
Well, and I think that's fair. Like I said, I think that they went and asked. It looks, if you look at sheer numbers, whether you want to call it because it doesn't address population growth, all ministries stayed whole. They did not decrease. And so for me, I'm like, yes, I get that there is like the differentiator of like what we need and what type of growth would match population inflation. I just don't really think that those hard conversations happen. And I to say that I could then say they worked their ass off and still got to 5.4, I just don't know if that's truly the case based on some of the like very shiny things that were announced.
Okay, so closing thoughts. If this is not a conservative budget, what is it?
A 2025-26 budget.
Very careful of you.
I know. I think it's like pretty left. It's pretty high spend. I think we have an issue in our province on like balancing our revenue and our expenditure. And so do I think that the fiscal hawks within our party, myself included, are thrilled with this? No. Do I have some compassion in the fact that it is a shitty deck of cards? Absolutely. But like, I would have liked to see a lot tougher decisions, scaling back on capital, scaling back significantly on the recovery model until you know that it works. That's probably a decent chunk. And even just showing, even if there is a deficit and you got it down to 3, there was speculation that it was anywhere between 2 and 5. And then to hear 5.2 was like, oh, like, I don't know why that just hit differently. And maybe because I was preconditioned for under 5. But yeah, I don't know what kind of budget it is. I just don't think it's a conservative one.
Okay,
this is where I'm like, why doesn't the NDP love it? It's like, but money everywhere.
Still, you're in this position where you're having to make tough choices. Your party's having to make tough choices. We had an even tougher deck of cards, and still you have no sympathy for us. It's mind blowing to me. I don't
have sympathy for my own party right now. So
my take on the budget is it's like a total populist budget. This is a budget designed to be able to say like a bunch of top lines, tax cut, holding spending strong. We ran a deficit. We have a path to balance. It's like, I mean, kudos to the comms team, but this is a budget not necessarily built to sustain Alberta for the long term, but it's built to have some top line messages that, are not all good because that's impossible in this moment, but get them the headlines, the best headlines they can.
I wanted to ask you because, like, do you remember the Prentice budget? I'm sure you do because it was very helpful for you. But like, it was everyone gets something, but no one really gets everything.
Yeah.
And that was an election style. I don't think it was a campaign budget. Do you think that this one's kind of like a campaign style budget?
No. Oh my gosh. If this was like the campaign budget, it would be like a terrible campaign.
Well, but that's like, I just wanted to see what you would say. I don't think it is, but I'm like, what? This isn't the second year really tough cut budget that sometimes you see in a cycle.
Yeah.
I don't know where it really fits on like a 4-year model.
And
maybe just because it's different.
Like, I mean, governments don't want to have their worst budget year in the last year. Like, this could be the worst budget year so that they can build up to like a better budget by the time the election comes. That would be my guess.
Yeah. And you know what? I will say, like, and I know I think you're going to listen to Horner speak at lunch. I listened to him this morning. He did, when showing like the payback and the tough decisions, is also like, this tough cuts and tough decisions is not over because of the fiscal framework and their requirement to repay it in 3 years. I think that this was their biggest hit and their biggest deficit, and they're going to have to work it down. Yeah. And it's projected like $2 billion in 2 years, but you're still going into no. But I'm saying like, but you're right, and like you can't do that. But I think it's going to be really interesting going into the election, how you bounce back from that, and how our biggest thing was like, you guys accumulated $80 billion was a message during the campaign.
And now there's $107 billion.
But, it's just, I think it's going to be like a long process to get back to that balanced fiscal accountability that is prided by conservatives.
And it's going to be much harder to sling that mud in the next election when there's more mud on your side.
So because you're a comms person, and when you did a budget, how do you feel about, like, I'm so mixed on Meet the Challenge as like the budget name?
I just don't even care. Like, no one reads the budget name. It's like it feels so good for the people that work on it. Nobody reads it. No one remembers it. Like,
he did weave it into
nothing.
His speech quite a bit,
and I never heard it.
Yeah, well, I did. But anyways, is there?
And what about that logo?
Yeah, these are all things that I'm like, meh.
Glad we spent so much time on that as a province.
Yeah. Okay, so I don't think either of us are giving it an A+ for this budget. For different reasons. You think that there should be, obviously like the significant higher investment in healthcare and education. I just hate the fact that there is a deficit. But there is some silver linings for me. The tax cut, the contingency that hopefully this deficit does not grow. But I think there was still a lot of people that could have been sad today to help.
And I will say that, sometimes in politics, when you've made no one happy, you've actually hit the right mark. So maybe they've hit the right mark. Who knows? That's it for our budget special episode. This is we're taking a little break next week because Erika is off on her 5-year late honeymoon. But we'll be back the week after that.
Yeah, and I'm sure there will be no shortage of catch-up content for us to report. But in the meantime, catch up on all of our episodes. So like and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts. And also follow us on X, Instagram, and Cheryl's favorite, TikTok.
The Discourse is hosted by Cheryl Oates and Erika Barootes. Follow on Instagram at The Discourse Pod. Subscribe to The Discourse on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.